welcome to the Borders Book Group. I am honored to present our author today, Christopher Paolini, and he is the author, of course, of The Inheritance Cycle, and that includes both Aragon and Eldest and upcoming Brissinger. So let's get started.
When you first started Aragon, first of all, how old were you when you first got the idea? And did you also have the idea completely come to you, or was it more of a gradual grasp of the concept?
The idea for Aragon hit me all at once, at least the kernel of it, if you will. That is of a dragon and a boy, or a young man finding a dragon egg and raising the dragon and becoming linked with the dragon and going on adventures with the dragon. That idea came to me very, very quickly, and I was probably actually 14 when I got that idea. And I tried to write it out a couple of times before I actually got into Aragon, and I still have those drafts sitting around of my attempts to get into that story, and it never worked. I didn't have the world worked out, I didn't have the characters worked out, so I'd get 2-3 pages in and it would flatline, but I always kept coming back to that idea of a young boy finding a dragon egg. So I got so frustrated, and some of this happened unconsciously too. I didn't really realize what I was working toward until I actually got there. But I took a sort of a break when I finished high school, and during that year I also worked at developing some of my other skills. So I read some books on how to write. I spent a couple of weeks plotting out a different story that I've never written, an entirely different fantasy story, actually starring an elf named Arya, coincidentally enough. And then once I felt like I had sort of a feel for how to construct a story, then I plotted out the trilogy, and then I actually started Aragon in very late 1998, so it was probably November 98 when I actually wrote the first words of Aragon.
In your original outline of Eldest, were there any things that you ended up changing when you actually wrote the book?
In Eldest?
Yeah.
Yes, actually. There was a very large... There are always smaller elements within any of the books I've written so far that you end up changing. You know, you have a couple preconceived notions about this or that, and then when you actually get to that point in the story, based on what you've written earlier, you may say, that no longer seems like a good idea. So you have to be open to those changes, because if you force what you had already sort of been imagining before, sometimes it doesn't work anymore and you'll end up making the story worse. But I actually had a fairly large storyline plot point in Eldest that I ended up rewriting.
Are you willing to give us any hints as to what it was?
It was Aragon's interactions with Arya. I sort of got off on the wrong foot with them in the first draft, and I ended up having to rework their entire relationship, interaction in the last third of the book, which was pretty painful because, you know, by the time you get to the editing, you start thinking of, well, we may tighten, we may tweak, we may rewrite, but the structure of the book is pretty much finished. And then to need to go back and rewrite something is usually pretty difficult. My editor had me move around a lot of the chapters with Roran and Aragon, with how the spacing of the point of view shifts between them worked. Because
did you write those stories all did you write the Aragon story sort of separately from the Roran story, or did you do it all at once?
Well, my approach to it when I did in Eldest was to write very large chapters with Aragon and then a very large chapter with Roran, because I figured, well, if you get into the story with one character, you want to stay with that character. But my editor, Michelle, she ended up convincing me, and she was right, that it helped move the story a lot quicker if you move back and forth between those characters, so you don't forget what's happening completely with Aragon or with Roran. And then with Eldest, actually, she didn't have me move any chapters, so I got the pacing much better with the third book, I think.
Did you like writing about Roran any better than Aragon, or do you like both of them equally?
In Eldest, I really enjoyed writing with Roran because it was a nice chance to write with a character who was more mature than Aragon. Not that I don't write, I do like writing with Aragon, but Roran, he already has won the woman that he wants to win. You know, Katrina's already in love with him. They're both together. And he knows what he wants. He's able to get it. He doesn't worry about things the same way Aragon does. You know, Aragon always, whatever's happening, Aragon thinks, you know, oh, why me? Why me? Why is this happening? What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Can I do this? What if I fail? And Roran just looks at it and says, oh, I got to go fight and kill that guy. Okay. And he goes and he does it. And everyone says, wow, how did you do that? He says, well, I just had to do it. That's sort of the difference between their personalities. With Eldest, though, Roran's story is still very interesting, I think, but the emotional heart of it really happened in Eldest, where, you know, he lost Katrina and having to defend the village and get the villagers to safety. And there's some other interesting things that happen with Roran in this book, and I think everyone will enjoy reading that. But really the focus has shifted back to Aragon now, and I think he's probably the more interesting character in the third book.
You're such an avid reader. I mean, you have a whole list of books to read on the website and so forth. So,
Yeah.
What are some of your top picks?
The problem is no matter how many books you read, there's always more that you haven't read.
Right.
I mean, I've been reading fantasy for a very long time, and there's still many, many fantasy authors that I haven't read, not to mention other genres. So, you know, and what I read nowadays, I wouldn't necessarily have enjoyed when I was, you know, a few years younger. So things have changed. Some of the books that I've enjoyed, Dune is a perennial favorite of mine. You know, if you like science fiction, if you like fantasy, read Dune. I just read the 7th Harry Potter book, actually just about 2 weeks ago, and really enjoyed that.
Did you have the spoiler, though?
No, all my family had read it, and I told them, I said, don't tell me, don't tell me. Whenever I met someone, I said, don't tell me how it ends. So, no, I enjoyed reading that. I've been reading some nonfiction recently.
Do you, now, books that you've read before, do you look at them differently?
I do. A lot of times I look back on a book and I'll say, wow, I never saw that in a text before. I never realized what the author was really conveying here, or how much more is in the story than I originally thought. Of course, I've also had the opposite reaction. There were some books I read when I was in my early teens. I look back now and I say, I don't know what I saw in those books. It's like, that's horrible. But for the most part, I see more in the writing, and it actually makes me read slower. I'm a very fast reader normally, but when I'm really paying attention, I really, really slow down and just read every single word and try to figure out, why did the writer choose this word, and why is it in there, and is this something I can learn from for my own writing?
Do you ever reread your books, like Aragon and Eldest?
You mean for fun?
I don't know.
You know, I read the books when I write them, and I read them when I edit them, but I've never been able to just sit down and read them as a book. Whenever I read them, my mind is always going, oh man, I could change this, I could change it. Oh, that was pretty good. You know, why couldn't I do this here? It's not a calm experience for me reading the books, so I generally try to avoid it unless it's really necessary, which has gotten me into trouble sometimes with my first drafts, because there have been a few times when I've forgotten something from the first books that I've then needed to correct after the fact.
Does music influence your writing as well?
Yes, I listen to music all the time when I write, so I tend to listen to a lot of classical music and a lot of movie soundtracks. Movie soundtracks are excellent for writing. Yeah.
What movie soundtracks do you like?
I've been listening to the soundtrack for Kingdom of Heaven recently, which is a fantastic soundtrack, and let's see, the Pirates of the Caribbean. Good music for writing. Yeah, Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer's stuff is good. Let's see, what else have I been listening to? I listen to a lot of South American, Native Indian music, like panpipe music. It's really good for the elves. And, you know, this and that.
So what's some good advice for young writers? I mean, you made it happen at 15, and that's saying a lot, I think, is important, that, you know, you proved it could happen.
It's really hard to make